Header Footer Gallery is part of the New Media Caucus and is dedicated to promoting the creative output of our members by situating their work in thoughtfully curated exhibitions that take place across our entire web presence. New Media Caucus is an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars. Recognizing new media art to be inherently interdisciplinary, multimodal, and evolving, we support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution of the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership, to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address both within the caucus and in our field.
Welcome everyone to the 30th episode of Header Footer Presents. I'm your host Rene.
And I'm your co-host Constanza.
In this episode, we have two special guests, Bowie Bo Gyung Kim and artist Muhammad Toukhy. Both of them collaborated to create our current exhibition, The Pond of Person A, and we are really excited to hear about what they have to say.
Like Rene mentioned, this is very exciting. We typically don't have too many artist interviews or curator interviews, so this is something that we hope that we're going to continue doing for a little while. So Bowie is the curator of the exhibition, and Muhammad is the artist that's being featured in the exhibition as well. So first, let's talk about what the exhibition is about, and then we can get to further questions about how this came to be, etc. Right? So I'll leave it to you both to talk about what the exhibition is, just to describe it for the audience as well.
This exhibition is about the virtual experience for our audience. So I made a virtual space for the virtual experience that audience get into virtual space themselves and then see the artworks. That is the kind of essential point to build this space. But then also I want to make the audience browse in the island and then try to find the artworks where it is. Just want to give some authority or subjectivity for the audience to browsing themselves in their purpose, in their mind.
Mohammed, do you have anything to add to this concept, specifically like in the frame of your work as well?
So the work that is featured in this project, in this virtual exhibition, is a work of mine called Kismet, which is actually a part of a larger project that was made last year in collaboration with a friend and a fellow artist called Sharon Benson. At the time we were working on this, you could say, a project that featured both a film, a performance work, and also this program that I created to kind of like accompany all the work and this part of this move that we were trying to do with this project. And the work Kismet, the program, is actually, it's a software piece that reacts visually to sound that it picks up from a microphone. And when it was developed, it was supposed to be a part of the installation space in which Sharon and I presented the film work and a performance work that was also at the time called Kismet as a working title. Later, the film's title was changed to Kisma. In Arabic, it means the vision or a part of something. And the idea was that we project the software piece that visualizes the sound and echo and ambience and room tone that it picks up from the installation space. And when I first met Bowie in New York as part of the Residency Unlimited program in Brooklyn, so I got to talk and introduce this project. And there was a lot of discussion between me and Bowie about this idea of, you could say, interactive media, interactive artwork in the context of art spaces and galleries. And later in the work on the project, we were talking about the possibility of Kismet to become a part of the part of person A. And for me, it was a really interesting opportunity to test it in this kind of new setting.
Awesome.
I'm curious to know, where does the title come from? It's very specific. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about it.
So,
You mean Kismet?
The exhibition space, right? The person of Pond A.
I think I can explain about it. This exhibition, the title is actually from my old painting project, which is starting from 2014. Then when I was 23 or 4-ish, I went to Warsaw to visit my friend, and then that time that visiting Warsaw is really interesting experience because there were not so many Asian population there, so I feel a little bit awkward at the time. I think this is the reason why I feel everything a little bit bizarre there. But then one day when I went to the walk with my friend at the park, I found a pond and then I felt something multiple emotional experience from the ponds. So I draw and then I draw 12 concept of the emotion and then also writing 12 concept of emotion following the drawing. And then I just forget about it for a long time. But then after Connie suggested me to make a virtual exhibition, I just suddenly record this idea, then try to make a virtual pond. And then while I was building the virtual space, I just record Muhammad's idea, the artworks Kismet, because I was so inspiring from this artworks when I was met Muhammad at RU. So RU is Residency Unlimited, by the way. So I just want to put the artworks inside of the ponds to say about the possibility of internet surface or website. And then I think Muhammad's artworks is super nice to show in this way. So so this is why the title is the pawns, the pawns of person A.
So one of the things that really jumped out at me is, well, first of all, you started this container, right? And then you go through it, and then boom, island, right? Which is a really, really good way to start this experience, because you don't know, like, unless you've seen like a lot of it or someone told you about it, it's a little bit jarring in a good way, that you're in this like little thing, and then you're in this completely open area, and then you start floating around it, and then you see the texts that are like scattered around those art, and I guess those texts, that's like part of your process, Bowie.
That text is actually also the text, and then my painting are about, are to explain about the project starting point about the project.
Yeah.
But then I think I just don't put. I decide not to put the too many explanation about that painting part, because I want to just to make a focus just on Muhammad's artworks itself, because that is the key point of this exhibition. So I just put the painting and then the writing as a kind of interior inside of the virtual space. So it's just like a small fun for about the pond, for about the island, about the emotion. But then I think I don't want to say extra, but then that is kind of extra funny inside of the island.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I think when I got to experience this exhibition, it was really exciting because of the island aspect to it, but I think it's something that goes back to the work that you've been doing, Bowie, and it's about human interaction, but also in virtual worlds versus the real world. And I got to see a form of agency that the viewer, the user has when interacting in this island, right? You go about, you choose where you can go, you float around, and the texts are there. At least for me, it was a really interesting experience because you travel, you traverse the island, you pick different spots in which you can experience. The text also is a part of that in some way, but then you also see Kismet, you see the works that you've done. And I think it allows the user to piece together certain elements, right, in whatever way they want. So there is a sense of agency within this exhibition. And I was wondering if, Mohammed, you wanted to speak more about that, like agency for the user in this particular case.
I think it's interesting because when we talk about virtual spaces,
Mhm.
we like I think most of us today common interaction with websites and user interfaces probably like in the first I mean like 30 minutes when we wake up,
Yeah,
we open, like even turning off the alarm clock in the morning is in a way entering a virtual space. It's a user experience at the end.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that what is interesting in as when we talk about the interface of the point of person A is that the a lot of what we would usually expect to be a part of like a UI, a user
Mhm.
interface, as a like a pop-up message that tells you about the exhibition, or like if we know it from video games, for example,
Mhm.
that you get close to like some sort of an object, and then you hover on it, and then you have like a message that pops up that tells you a bit of information about a certain object, which is it's a mechanism that does exist in the exhibition. But what for me was really interesting is that a lot of the texts were appearing as if they are themselves works by being existing inside the world space. Like we had
Mhm.
planes and quads that were featuring texts, and they were just kind of like put there. And for me, it's interesting because it kind of I think it breaks or challenges a bit the hierarchy that you have between what is curatorial, which is usually a piece of information or a piece of text, and the work itself. So in that context of like the user's experience and an agency, and like how we usually perceive an exhibition, and you could say the context of an exhibition, there's an interesting move that was made there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Especially, well, one of the big things that I've always been doing with the curations, obviously the ones I've done, not my guest curators, is this idea of the interface of space. Because one of the things is, for example, we have one which is one of the JMM award exhibitions,
Mhm.
the Justin Morrison. It was made in Twine. I don't know if you're familiar with that space, but it's a platform for creating like narrative games or experiences, right? And
Yeah.
we used it as an exhibition space using the concept of hyperlinks to create the illusion of moving through a physical space and then presenting the artworks within the same system. Um, so I've always been of this idea that curation has to exist in conjunction with the pieces rather than separate, right?
Mhm.
And so when Bowie did this, it was good to see that somebody else gets that, like this idea of integrating the curation into the actual space rather than just being this thing where it's like a text, right? Um, so I think that made it so much better in how it's seen. And the other thing that you mentioned is this concept of like well, just space, it keeps coming up, right? um I've been working in my research with performance in virtual spaces precisely. And one of the things that I've started to notice is that academics seem to place virtual worlds as slightly beneath real spaces, right? Like, it's not the same to be in a theater than it's to be in a virtual theater. It's not the same to be in a gallery than to be in a virtual gallery. Whereas when I speak to artists who are working in virtual spaces constantly, there's one of like generally there's two approaches. One of them is it's a continuation of my body. Like the fact that I perceive everything through my senses and my senses are connected to my body means that a virtual body is part of me. And the other one is I want my space and my virtual body to exist independent of the real world, but neither is seen as inferior. It's just a different, like, it's either a separation, kind of like what you see in cyber no glitch feminism, and in the other hand, which we covered in the last episode, and in the other one is this idea of uh like a holistic approach to it, like everything is together and there's no real difference. But I would like to hear like both of your impressions. Or do you do you agree with either one of those interpretations, or do you have another different approach?
I mean, maybe I can say that for me, it's interesting what you say about virtual spaces being an extension of the body at the end, and it's a bit of an anticlimactic definition maybe, but virtual spaces are virtual. I mean, they are, like, at least how I perceive them, they are a simulation of the space, and yeah, it's I know it's some people perceive this definition as problematic, and I can understand why, but at the end, our brains, to some extent, do perceive those spaces as somewhat real. I mean, if you are assuming that you are, as a user, experienced and oriented enough to,
Mhm.
you know, to have to know how to handle the WASD keys on your keyboard, which is another important, like, being tech savvy here is an issue, as we also, Bowie and I, previously discussed this.
Yeah.
But for me, what is interesting is constantly testing that and reacting to that. So Threat as a work is a work that kind of mirrors back your presence as a user inside this virtual space by visualizing your voice. And that's an effect that was interesting for me to create, which is it's a bit it kind of exposes you and turns you from someone who is peeping at something into someone who is exposed. And I think that's an effect that is interesting when it comes in touch with virtual spaces.
Understanding about Muhammad's answers and then Rene's question, I recently feel like about the approach to the virtual space from the audience, get some real emotional feeling or something really strong connection from the virtual space rather than in the past, I think. So it is actually similar with the artist side too. Artists are also using the virtual space and then the technology as a little bit different way, as I feel in my understanding. The approaches are a little bit more closer and closer than before, and then they get some different perspective individually. So the audience is also feeling like it's the agency in the virtual space is also one of my action as well, but then they sometimes already recognize this is the virtual thing strongly, and then the artist also using the virtual space or technology as a part of their self or a part of their body, but then also some artists use that the technology as a strategy or some kind of this different way rather than their own self, their self. So I think it is a little bit, the approach to the virtual space is a little bit developed or spreaded in a different way. So I believe there are so many definition or so many understanding about the virtual space or virtual activity depending on every individual, every kind of context or people's context of their selves in their own history.
I
Thank
think
you.
that's absolutely right. I think I've picked up on a couple of things that each of you have mentioned. And what I found interesting is I definitely agree. Virtuality is definitely something that depends on the person, but also kind of like their needs of wanting to be in virtual space, right?
Mhm.
For some, that might be an extension. For some, that might be, like Muhammad was saying, this idea of a mirroring of the simulation of being in virtual space and how you kind of traverse that. So I agree. It definitely depends on what the person is seeking or what they're needing from virtual space too. My other question, I guess, is how, and I think Mohammed, you picked up on this too. How accessible is this for, someone that is not accustomed to playing video games or, not as tech savvy, for instance, and experiencing this particular exhibition space?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem, right? Like
Mhm.
people who are not really so much oriented in using technology have a bit of a gate between them and any kind of virtual space.
Mhm.
Like, for example, I did I did share the link to the exhibition with many people, and many people who are, like friends and family who are usually interested and want to follow what I do. But sending it to my grandma was a bit weird because she usually calls me like when she has any charging her phone. So for her to get into using this kind of interface for an exhibition was like, I felt like it was like that maybe she wasn't an audience for this exhibition, and it was a question for me. But then again, as we discussed earlier in the email interview, Bowie and I, it's not like exhibitions and art spaces and the so-called white cube are accessible to people.
Mhm.
So here, what becomes accessible is the fact that it's a link, right? So anyone can go from their computer and visit the exhibition from anywhere in the world,
Mhm.
which I think
Yeah.
conceptually for me, as an artist who also deals with these kind of questions of, like location and places where I can have an agency, and even places where I can visit as a Palestinian, what I can call home. It's there's a lot of geographical issue about that. So for me, the virtual space, and which is a little bit of an imaginary space or like a potential of a space, is really interesting to explore. And yeah, so here it creates this effect that also is very much liberating for a user, for like a virtual visitor, we can call them,
Full visitor, yeah.
Yeah.
because you can theoretically actually like interact with the art in a very, assuming that you do know how to handle the technology, which isn't that complicated. It has to be
No,
said.
no, not at all.
It's not computer science. It does give you a lot of like liberation in how you behave in the space. Like you're allowed to do what you actually want to do and actually interact with the art and how you want to interact with the art. And if we compare that to visiting a museum or a gallery, there's a lot of acting and performance around that. I feel like when
Yes.
I go to an exhibition that is physical, I need to pretend like I know how to act in an exhibition. Well, sometimes I don't give my truest and most authentic reaction to the gallery space. Or if I go into like a show and I really want to leave after 5 minutes because nothing is interesting for me, sometimes I will drag myself a bit longer just for the etiquette. And here in
Yes.
virtual spaces, we solve that problem because no one's monitoring you.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
another thing that was discussed is that Kismet also challenges that by again reflecting your presence in the virtual space by visualizing you and your presence.
Yeah, there's something interesting about the idea of the accessibility, which is I agree, I completely agree. One of the things that when I first started working with the platform that you were using, which is New York City, is that there was no collision, right? Like you can go through anything, and I was really upset about that because coming from like gaming and VR and all these things, it makes more sense to have collisions, right? So I got in contact with the developers and they were like, "Yeah, no, we know, but it's not an accident. It's a very conscious choice because we found out in during research that users who are not familiar with virtual worlds and moving around them like in video games, they really struggle going around objects. Like they will literally get stuck on a corner and just be there like an NPC. So the solution was like we're not going to make anything solid, and also and I don't know if you notice this, but everything is the right side from both sides. So if you have a text and you comment it from this way, it'll be readable. If you go through it and turn around, it's still readable. So those were active decisions to reduce the skill level required to navigate the spaces in New York City, which I found that it's a really great thing to do. It was really smart the way they approached it, because otherwise they would have been stuck with a lot of people not being able to navigate, right? And the other thing is that we have to start considering that like people in their 60s are Gen X. So they're already starting to be more familiar with like video game languages. And once we get to millennials being in like 80s or 70s, 70% of millennials play a video game and 90% of Gen Z. So eventually this barrier that we perceive is gonna, well, it won't disappear, but it will be less of an issue for us creating these types of experiences, which I also I'm looking forward to in a way.
But that
Like,
also goes hand in hand with what Bowie was saying in terms of, the technology has become much better. And and that's also something I wanted to discuss. Because the technology has advanced so much, you have, degrees of accessibility, of course,
mhm.
and potentiality and possibility with that virtual worlds offer you. Um, how does the development of technology also increase the feeling of embodiment in a virtual space? I don't know if that, that's something I often think about just because of the history of VR, for instance. Artists had to make do with the limited technology that they had at the time, but they wanted to prioritize a sense of embodiment. And here, the technology has advanced so much, and I'm wondering how that correlates, if there's a one-to-one, with the feeling of embodiment in these virtual spaces, and maybe how that translates to the exhibition as well.
I think I have something to say about that, but I want to hear if Bowie wants to answer first.
Kept recalling about the Kismet, about the feeling from the Kismet when I first saw the Kismet last year. I also feel something very multiple emotional experience as I saw the pond when I was young, which is I don't know what is the connection between the feeling between the ponds and then Muhammad's Kismet, but then eventually I felt something from the virtual experience as I saw the physical object as well. So I just kept recalling something different because of the technology development. And then I am just surrounding by so many screens, and then I am always holding the technology everywhere. I think I am also changing in following by the generation about the technology, but then so I mean, this is the reason why I felt something really similar experience from Muhammad's Kismet, And then when Muhammad mentions about something, reflection of the people as a confession room in our interview, that recalls me. I mean, that resonate me a lot of things about the emotional experience in the virtual technology. So I think I am the person who also feel that difference between the past and the future, and then in the present as well.
Mm.
So to continue this point of Kismet becoming potentially some sort of a confession room, so I think that one of the potentials or the promises that the internet gave and technology gave is a bit of a space where people can unload what they're who they are and what they're feeling and what they're carrying through through maybe like chat rooms or people who they meet or even the internet. I think that today, like I saw an interesting statistic that one of the biggest changes between this year and last year between among people who are using AI like ChatGPT or Gemini was that today a lot of people are using ChatGPT as a bit of a form of a therapy.
Oh,
People
yeah.
are actually talking to ChatGPT as if it's a therapist, and that's I think it's really interesting because I think people need that, like this like there is a potential in using interfaces and technology, and I'm not sure about what I'm saying, just it's just an out loud thought as something therapeutical. But what broke that promise is that we learned that technology is not naive, and corporations who stand behind big tech like OpenAI and Google and et cetera, are monetizing on us and as users, and us telling technology, like confessing to technology, is a need that we have, and it's something that it doesn't necessarily come like people are profiting, corporations are profiting over that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like it's although it wasn't a thought while I was making Kismet, it's something, it's like more of maybe like a resolution that came afterwards, is that what if we did create interfaces who are, as far as I know, are somewhat innocent, that are listening to you, but they don't do anything else.
Right.
They don't capture anything else. And that comes back also maybe like to the question that Constanza mentioned about like embodiment and how we feel our bodies. And it's not that it's not like we don't have this in technology and in interfaces, like different features that make us aware of our presence. If I open Instagram, I can immediately swipe to open the camera and see myself. But the thing is that when I see myself through the interface, like through the social media or the application, I see it just because it's a tool that turns me into a picture, it turns me into content. And here in Kismet, and I think in generally in the point of person A, you are present and you are embodied in a way because your presence as a person, as a human being, and who makes voices is documented and is reflected. Sorry, not documented, but is reflected. But it's not recorded, and I think that's for me. It's something that is important. It's not. There is like a voice, like the computer does record your voice technically, but it doesn't save it anywhere. So you don't become content. And I think that there's also another problem that I'm thinking about, and is the idea that technology is kind of like resist, like the more it progresses, the more it resists the human body and reality like itself. I think that if we look at like design trends from 10 years ago, like when the first iPhone came out, we saw that the apps being very realistically designed. Like the YouTube app looked like a TV, the calculator looked like a real calculator. They tried to make us feel like the apps that we are using are somewhat similar to real life. And today everything has become so abstract, so flat, and so similar, like in the name of minimalism. But I think that what it does is actually it puts us a lot farther from technology. Like as we kind of, and I know that it sounds a bit like like an apocalyptic dystopian take, but that's not what I mean. Is
Yeah.
that we forget our bodies, that we are flesh, and when we constantly see avatars all the time as like as a way to embody people, we don't think of the actual, like, maybe human being that is standing behind this avatar. And I think it's a problem that could have, like, maybe some dark consequences. Maybe I'm not sure about what I'm saying, but it's a question.
No, yeah, it's very interesting. I'm sorry, you want to say something, Connie?
Yeah, no, yeah, something that came up for me just in your discussion of, technology is not neutral, but what do we do about it in terms of the corporations that are behind this technology? And what I found so liberating from the exhibition space is that there is this wonderful tension between freedom and agency to do and navigate as much as you want and however you want. And, that recording of the voice, right? And the fact that it doesn't save it, like you were mentioning, right? Doesn't save it. It's not for nefarious reasons or alternative, reasons.
Ulterior.
Ulterior, thank you so much. Ulterior reasons. But it brings me to the thought that I've had in my own research about how does contemporary art transform technology towards different ends? And I think that is a generative way of thinking about the potentiality of contemporary art. And because where else can you possibly experience these types of new ways of experiencing technology away from the minimalism, right? Away from the corporate greed and the profit driven, impetus for creating these things as tools. Your project, like the exhibition itself, is an example, a really great example of agency, but also reprieve from all this technological environment and context that we live in. That is at once liberating itself too, right? Because we can communicate, we can do all these different things, but you also have to question at what cost, right? And I found that the exhibition really challenges that in really interesting ways. That was just more of a comment.
So I also wanted to mention something really interesting. I recently interviewed this artist, and she's a dancer in VR chat. And she was the subject of a documentary on HBO, actually, called We Met in Virtual Reality. And one of the things she mentions in that show is this was done in 2017, I believe. And she said, if I could make my living teaching dance in VR, I would do it. And now in 2025, she makes her living teaching dance in VR.
Wow.
And she lives her entire life in VR. Most of her friendships are in VR. Most of her job and like work is on VR. She gets hired to do not private dances, like private performances for like social like kind of like a club or something, and they want to have like entertainment for like an event or something, and she gets hired to do dances, choreographs, all that kind of things. And she even met her partner in VR and married her partner in VR, and then they married in real life and lived together. But it's a really interesting way, because like she says, like I some of my friends, I haven't seen my so and so's real IRL body in such and such time. So it's a really interesting way that she has like integrated virtuality and embodiment into her complete existence. To her, I don't think there's a difference. She inhabits these worlds, she inhabits them. She still has like a real life existence, like it's not completely, like she's not divorced from reality, but the nature of her work and the relationships she fosters have been completely online, and it's a really interesting way of approaching virtual reality and virtual spaces. I think I don't know how that resonates or contrasts to what you were trying to communicate with these pieces in this space.
I mean, the core is that the woman who live in the virtual space is also, in my understanding, is also about the experience as a physical person. So she want to get into the virtual city as a virtual space, as a virtual character, as a physical person, which is for me really interesting to make a connection between the virtual experience and then physical experience, both of them, because I mean, in our project is also about the experience inside of the virtual space, but it kind of has to be turned to the physical experience as well. So people who has a physical body get an experience inside of the virtual space, not as a virtual existence actually, but as a physical person in simultaneous situation. So I just have a kind of curious that how do we understand about the virtual experience? Should we understand the virtual experience as a virtual existence, or should we understand the virtual experience as a virtual existence who has a physical body? I'm just popped up.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Yes, the liminal kind of experience, which is who am I question in this case.
Very existential.
I mean, when I experienced the Kismet live in the new version of Muhammad's the artworks, the sounds is kept showing as a light pillar, light effect. It is kind of visual effect from the sound, and then I am the one who see the sound.
Yes.
So I have to, in this case, I feel like I have to see that the visual effect from which is translated from the sound. So, and then I feel the existence inside of the virtual space as a virtual existence in this case. So I feel kind of, if I am virtual existence inside of the virtual space, I think I cannot feel that kind of transition from the sounds to the visual effect, and then it helps to understand the current situation, because I can see all the sounds which I cannot hear by my ear, but then I can see the sound from the virtual effect, which is much makes me much more like the existence inside the physical, not in the virtual. So it's kind of tricky to understand between the two relationship. Yeah. So I'm just curious, like, what should I? Yeah.
She did say something very interesting, and she said, "When I think of my friends, like I mean, they're people, they're real people, and there's just this thing in between us. But that's the same thing as a phone call, right? Like, because we think of virtual friends and like IRL friends and virtual friends, but in reality, they're all IRL friends. We're just connecting to them in a different way." And that was like really interesting to me, because she has a point. Like, the people she's interacting with are real human beings. It's not like she's dealing with virtual agents or a chatbot. It's an actual person. It's just that this actual person looks like a potato or a mushroom or a cat person, right? So that changed to me for me a lot of the things that I consider about virtuality.
That's interesting.
It really is. I think that, and it might sound like a hot take, but I think that whenever anything becomes digitalized, we can't really make sure that it's truly connected to reality. And what I mean by that is that here we are using, internet to talk to each other, and what we have to do is kind of trust technology and trust the software that it's actually translating our voices correctly.
Yeah.
But what actually happens is that, we speak in real life, and we say, like, we use our vocal cords to speak, and our computers pick it up and they turn it into code, right? And this thing translates back to your speakers. So there is a pipeline here that goes through a lot of tech, and there is also it's different, but it's still, when we talk about Kismet, for example, it's also a pipeline of code that turns your voice into something sensory. So when we talk about VR chat, it takes your movements and your inputs on buttons and on controllers into another kind of sensory translation through code. So I don't know, is it right? Like, you could say that there's a hierarchy between the levels of how loyal to the source technology, like the translation technology is, but it's still technology that we trust in order to actually, like, translate our bodies and our ways of communication from real life into screens. So I definitely agree with her with saying that at the end we are physical creatures who are using technology in order to make ourselves, like, go broader and get, like, farther, and it's not very different from people who are using, I think, from people who are using, email to work, to get jobs, or to communicate with their friends. If you use VR chat in order to do the same things, like, to us it looks different, but is it? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like with Kismet, with like like the pillars of light, like that is in a way the similar thing. Like you have the sound and you're converting it into like a series of numbers that create the moving things, right? But the sound is real, even though the visualization is, I don't want to say fake because it's not fake, but I don't know.
Translation.
Yeah, it's a translation, but it's really interesting because it is, you're still dealing with something real, even though it's, because, well, when I read the interview, you were mentioning this, that when it was on the on site, there was this thing, right? And then you were concerned that it had no place, that it was untethered in a way. And then once you have it into the domain, it's no longer just an exe; it's an actual thing again. And I think that's really interesting because it comes back to this idea of, when is this piece of software real, when it is untethered, and when it becomes embodied in one way again, right? Like, what really changed from the software is, it was not much, but what changed is the way we see it, right? Or I don't know, is that something that was what you going through your mind?
Absolutely. It was also a later observation. And
Mhm.
when we first talked about having Kismet at the point of person A, the first thing I said was that it's going to be quite hard to upload the build as a web build to the exhibition. It's something
Yeah.
that was technically very difficult to do because, like, I use Unity as a game engine, and it doesn't natively support that kind of pipeline.
Yeah.
And I had to program it in a way that to actually have it work. And I think what and I'm happy that Boy insisted on that, because otherwise we wouldn't have this very important effect, which is having the domain as well as an address. It's actually like how it's called an address for a reason,
Yeah.
and is that it's a place that anyone can visit, and it exists on the same server, right? So it's a place in a way, like, it's a virtual place,
Yeah.
right? And it's not as if we made a lot of copies of a file that anyone can download and play on their computer, because then that would be a real echo chamber. But having it as a place that anyone can log into, or, like, visit it as a domain, it really turns it into a space that is more accepting to a lot of different inputs that are coming from different kind of visitors who are visiting the exhibition.
Yeah. Connie, you have something to ask?
No, I'm just reflecting on, the question of if it's virtual. There are existential questions, of course, that come up for me. And it's like, well, we're talking about space, we're talking about bodies and virtual spaces, but also does the experience that we have in virtual spaces, does that equate to a real experience? And, just very fundamental questions. But I'm also thinking this is the new environment, this is the new space that and this goes back to the comment before about different generations and how they interact with technology, right? This is our new reality in many ways. And so I found that really, really interesting. I think just thinking about different types of realities and how we make it real, even if they are virtual too, right? And the translation, there's a series of translations that takes place in the exhibition, but also in the code. And it reminds me of Levmanovich's idea of encoding, and we won't get into Levmanovich because, reasons, but also, it is definitely the translation of sound code to sensory experience too, which I found really, really interesting, and how that's becoming, something that we experience on a daily as well, through various different technologies too. I guess one of the last questions that I wanted to ask is, how did you both communicate? Speaking of virtual spaces and not seeing each other for a while, there's my liaison. But how did you negotiate between what things were going to go on in the exhibition? How did you communicate how it would look like together? Because I found that this relationship that you have in between curator and artist worked really well, right? Just reading over your interview that you did, Bowie, with Muhammad, but also it was a success, obviously. So I'm curious to know how that worked for you in so-called virtual space.
I will. I really want to say that firstly, yes, that the project is my project. From starting from my project from 2014, but then actually I was so inspired by Muhammad's Kismet last year, which is just like capturing my mind to understand reality through the virtuality, because and I think that inspiration is the core of this exhibition. So I think the conversation or communication between the curator and artist is really, I think, well, I don't know what Mohammed is thinking about, but then I think this is kind of fluent because all the conversation is based on the inspiration from Mohammed's artworks. So on, so yeah, we talked by email. We haven't had virtual kind of met in person while we preparing this exhibition, but then all the conversation is kind of fluent, and then I also have a kind of need for to Muhammad, but then I don't know, Muhammad probably also had another kind of need to me, but all the conversation was very fluent between the two, because everything's because of the inspiration from the artworks.
So it stems from a sort of admiration and like
Uh-huh.
connection between your projects from the past, but also how it informs the present, which is Muhammad's work. And I found that really generative. But yeah, Muhammad, how was your experience working with Bowie?
It was great, really, because I think that what made it very easy for me is that the fact that I felt like Bowie really understood the project, like at the beginning, maybe even a bit more than I understood it, and the idea of installing it inside a virtual exhibition for me was an epiphany moment for this project, and it made me revisit it again. I definitely worked on to work on the workarounds in order to make it work on the web version a little bit more than what I worked in order to create the program, the software piece from the first place. So it was for me really like working with Bowie on this project was like an opportunity to really reflect on the project and study it. Something that I've been really enjoying doing with my projects, coming back to them, visiting them again, studying them again. So the Pond of Person A was a great opportunity for that. And once I visited the space, like the draft of the space when it was still in primary stages, I completely understood and I knew how I want Kismet to appear in it. And I think there was a very fluent and almost intuitive communication and understanding between me and Bowie about how those things need to be and and to look like, even when it came to the smaller details. So it was a really good experience, I would say.
I actually want to add is like the core idea between the Kismet and then the points of person A is kind of similar because they are showing the reality through the virtuality, but then the reality that we saw from the virtuality is not what we can sense with our physical sensibility. So the virtual project that I want to make is also one of the things to show the audience's behavior, which we cannot recognize our physical environment. But Kismet also show the kind of reality behind of our reality, which we cannot recognize sometimes. So I think this is the core, which was super matched with the project and artworks. And then this is the reason why the conversation and the communication is so fluent, because we have kind of similar underneath the purpose of the project and then artworks.
Questions or comments? Last comments?
Thank you for this opportunity. It's such a great opportunity to make a virtual version. This is my first experience to build a virtual exhibition, and then I was kind of confusing when I was making this project, but then it works actually. So I was very surprised when I finished this project with Muhammad. And then, yes, I was really, really happy to make a new version of exhibition as a curator. This is kind of a new opportunity and also kind of step of opportunity for curator.
For me, the same. I'm really thankful for this experience and for the opportunity to show the work in a virtual space. It definitely brought so many questions that I'm really happy to wrestle with.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both for being here. This was an excellent discussion. I hope this was illuminating for our audience members. And please check out the exhibition at New Media Caucus website, the header footer gallery space. Rene, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you all for this fantastic work that you did in the gallery. I couldn't be happier. And obviously, you're both welcome again to participate. Also, I want to invite everyone to join the curation efforts that we have. You can always pitch something to us, and we will take it into consideration if it fits the program. We would be happy to have other people rather than just me curating. There's also a couple announcements. We are workshopping the possibility of creating a mentorship program where basically you pitch an exhibition to us, and I take the time to give you the tools necessary for bringing it to fruition, readings, like mentorship itself, support, and then obviously you would have your exhibition shown in the New Media Caucus, so stay tuned for that. We will have an open call soon for that, I hope. And pretty much that's it for now. Don't forget to go visit us at newmediacaucus.org. We are the banner on top, where you will see the pond of person A, and you can click on it, and it'll send you directly to Bowie's and Muhammad's work. Finally, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.